When Fraser Doherty was just 14 years old, he spent most of his afternoons the same way any teenager would, playing video games, avoiding homework, and daydreaming about all the things he wanted to do one day. But unlike most kids his age, Fraser had one thing that quietly set him apart: an unusual fascination with his grandmother's homemade jam. It started innocently. One rainy afternoon in Edinburgh, Fraser visited his grandmother, who was stirring a steaming pot of fruit on the stove. The kitchen smelled like childhood. Warm, sweet, comforting. Fraser helped her label jars and attach ribbons, thinking nothing of it. But then his grandmother said a sentence that would unknowingly alter the course of his entire life. People buy things that make them feel something. Fraser didn't fully understand those words yet, but he remembered them. She taught him the recipe, not just the mixture itself, but the love, the patience, the idea that something simple could be meaningful if it was honest and made well. Days later, Fraser made his first batch alone. The jars were crooked, the labels were messy, but when he took them to his neighbors, something unexpected happened. People loved it, not just because it tasted good, but because it felt handmade, real, authentic. And that's when the spark ignited. A 14-year-old boy began making jam in his parents' kitchen. Without realizing he was about to build a brand that would appear on the shelves of the biggest supermarkets in the UK, Fraser started selling the jars at local farmers markets and small shops. People were surprised to see a boy behind the table, but they admired his enthusiasm. Some encouraged him, some laughed, some thought it was cute, but Fraser didn't care. Every weekend he woke up earlier, cooked more jams, printed more labels, and reinvested everything he earned back into fruit and jars. He didn't have a business plan. He didn't have a bank loan. He didn't even have a website. All he had was a recipe and an unstoppable drive to make something of it. By the time he was 16, the demand had grown so much that he was producing hundreds of jars a week. His parents' house permanently smelled like boiling fruit. The kitchen was a disaster zone. At one point, the neighbors complained because the recycling bins were overflowing with empty jam jars. Still, Fraser pushed forward. One day. He read about the growing trend of healthy, all-natural foods. And right then, he made a decision that would change everything. He would create a jam with no refined sugar, only natural fruit, a healthier alternative to anything on the shelves. He worked for months, experimenting with different techniques, adjusting the recipes, failing, retrying, failing again. Until one day, he perfected it. He called it Super Jam. It was bold. It was different, and it was exactly what the market was secretly waiting for. At 17, he got the courage to approach the massive supermarket chain, Waitrose. He walked into their office with jars in his hands, the same way a knight would carry a shield into battle. Most people would never dare pitch to such a giant, but Fraser was too young to be scared. He presented his jam. They tasted it. They examined his story. And then, unbelievably, they gave him what every small food entrepreneur dreams of: a contract not for one store, not for 10 stores, but for hundreds. Overnight, Fraser went from a boy stirring pots in his parents' kitchen to the head of a rapidly growing food brand. He had to scale production, establish manufacturing, design professional packaging, and learn everything about logistics, marketing, and supply chains, all while his classmates were studying for high school exams. By the age of 18, Fraser became one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the UK, with a product made of fruit and a recipe learned from his grandmother. But success didn't come without challenges. Larger manufacturers tried to copy him. Some companies mocked his age. Investors doubted him. Competitors tried to block his products. People told him he was too inexperienced to run a company. Yet Fraser had something they didn't. He had built his business from sincerity and passion, not from corporate strategy. Consumers felt his authenticity, and authenticity is something money can't buy. Superjam expanded into Europe, Australia, and Asia. Fraser wrote a best-selling book. He gave TED Talks. He created a charity program that hosted free tea parties for thousands of elderly people, a heartfelt tribute to the grandmother who started it all. And through it all, he kept repeating the same sentence: The best ideas come from ordinary people solving ordinary problems in extraordinary ways. Fraser Doherty's story is a living example of how small ideas, the kind we often overlook, can become life-changing if approached with focus and courage. His brand wasn't born from a business textbook. It wasn't funded by investors. It wasn't created by experts. It was created by a teenager in a kitchen who believed that something simple could become something meaningful. Most people wait for the perfect moment to start something. Fraser didn't wait. He began with what he had: fruit, jars, and a recipe that made people smile. And that's the real lesson. Success doesn't always come from inventing something revolutionary. Sometimes it comes from rediscovering something ordinary and making it better than anyone ever expected. It comes from consistency, passion, and the belief that even a small idea deserves a chance. If a boy with jam jars could build a global brand before turning 20, then anyone with determination, curiosity, and the willingness to start, no matter how small, is already on the path toward their own breakthrough. Because great stories don't begin with perfect plans. They begin with imperfect attempts, messy kitchens, supportive grandmothers, and a young person brave enough to say, "I think I can do this."